Hi, my name's Vince Sheehan, and today I'd like to look at this book, The Madness of Crowds, Gender, Race and Identity by Douglas Murray. I'd like to go through this book, exploring really Murray's train of thought. Now, Douglas Murray is a fairly well-known cultural commentator, figure in the British media. He's associate editor of The Spectator, and over the years he's been on various programmes such as BBC Question Time and other kind of news programmes, if you like, often representing a point of view right of the centre, I think it's fair to say. And I guess if you could sum up what this book is about in a sentence, it's really a scathing critique of the whole idea of intersectionality and identity politics, which of course has come very much to the forefront of public consciousness even in the last few years. He examines this whole idea of what's often called wokeness, I guess, and he's rather critical of that. And the book really covers all of the political and social hot potatoes of the day in a rather uncompromising and direct way. In the introduction, Murray points out the recent and bewildering rise of wokeism, if you like, in contemporary society. And then Murray begins with this first chapter about homosexuality. Murray himself is gay, so he has, I guess, some insights into this, of course. Basically, Murray here is saying that being gay and being queer are two different things. Being gay is something, of course, which people have suffered much hardship from in the past, much persecution. But Murray argues that that ship has sailed. You know, gay people, so obviously not in the whole world, because there's still many places where, you know, to be gay could be inferior life, but generally in the West, you know, there's never been a better time to be openly gay. But Murray suggests that being queer is slightly different. This is kind of a politically loaded term, queerness, which kind of taps into leftist politics, I guess, which is a common theme in all of these issues he examines. And he says that, and he goes along the lines of that, you know, you can be the wrong kind of gay in today's society. You know, you can't be, you have to be very much aligned with this kind of leftist agenda. That's the kind of angle Murray's going for here. So he's very much looking at the politicisation of homosexuality. He also discusses a lot about whether being gay is a hardware or software issue, you know, whether it's something someone's born with, or it's something, you know, environmental, the people you grow up with, etc., or is it a mixture of both? And that kind of has echoes in later chapters in the book, particularly the trans issue. Interspersed between these hot topics, if you like, he has these interludes. So the first interlude is really about what Murray says is the Marxist underpinning of these of intersectionality, where there's this kind of web or network of oppression, and they kind of fit together, and whether you're whoever you are, if you happen to be black and queer and whatever, or trans, there's this kind of, or even fat, or whatever it might be, there's these interlocking elements which kind of gauge how oppressed one is. And what started off as a rather fringe discipline in the 60s, 70s, kind of rose in the 80s, has now become incredibly mainstream and widespread. And that's where Murray argues these identity politics and this wokeism comes from. Murray then tackles women and feminism, and he very much critiques feminism where it is today. He's rather more sympathetic towards first and second wave feminism, particularly later on in the book, as you'll find out soon. But he is very much critical of the idea that this rhetoric where men are kind of demonised, being equal isn't enough, men have to be downgraded, misandry, as he terms it. And he also talks about, the kind of mixed messages in the media, including film and music videos. He talks a lot about Nicki Minaj in one of her videos, which seems to be emblematic of the whole book in a way. He talks about how women are often portrayed in a highly sexualized way, whether it might be social media or music videos, TV programs, whatever it is. But then paradoxically, quite often, in like Hollywood, for instance, people can get very puritanical about the way women are portrayed as well. And there's this uneasy tension between, this Nicki Minaj approach of exposing lots of flesh, etc., in videos, etc., but then stepping back and kind of almost being a Mother Teresa kind of figure. He also speaks a lot about the feminism and the patriarchy. He's very critical of this as well. He then has another interlude, this time about the tech industries, centred around Silicon Valley, very much challenging the what he regards as the biased views of companies like Facebook, Google, Twitter, etc., which all have a very kind of, he argues, very leftist view on things, which can very much skew the information presented or being available to view online. Then after that, Murray, moves on to race, and he talks a lot about Martin Luther King, who of course made, of course, in some of the most wonderful words of the 20th century, yearned for a time when people would not be treated with prejudice because of their skin colour. But Murray argues that rather than healing racial tensions, there's very much a strand these days which strives to keep these divisions, and it strives to keep people grouped into these camps, including being black, rather than just encouraging people to, be more, just to treat people as humans as such, rather than what particular ethnicity they're from. And he's extremely critical of American university campuses, where kind of hyper-attuned students almost bullying their lecturers and deans, etc., on the campuses in rather unreasonable ways, using this kind of very loaded rhetoric. And again, like the gay issue, Murray argues that, you know, being black isn't enough to fit into this camp. You know, you've got to be black and have the right views. He cites Kanye West, who very much, you know, is not of this kind of leftist view with his support of Donald Trump, etc. So I think Murray seems to see that much of the rhetoric on the far left, which has become more mainstream in recent years, is becoming rather over the top and exaggerated, even becoming racist itself towards other people. Which brings us on to the next interlude, which is about the issue of forgiveness. Murray notes that with this rise in identity politics, in these different camps, banging their drums for their causes, to the exclusion of everybody else perhaps, there's this vindictive streak in many of these voices where people are just hauled up for public shame if they've ever expressed any thought counter to this prevailing leftist woke view, if you like, on things. You know, and people just going into old tweets coming a cropper, and you know, people making slip-ups, speaking publicly and being, you know, completely lambasted for it. And Murray argues, you know, we need to be forgiving of each other. And perhaps in the longer term as well, you know, if these wounds are going to be healed, you know, these divisions we've caused between us, these prejudices, there does need to come to a point where we begin to forgive each other. And he argues that much of this these identity politics do the opposite. They just want to punish and crucify people forever and ever for past mistakes. Murray then moves on finally to the whole issue of transgender, and you know, he talks about people, including people he knows who are what he describes as intersex, where they've you know, feel like they're in the wrong body, and he seems to be very sympathetic about such people. But I think where Murray draws the line is he thinks that the whole trans issue is just moved far too fast without society really understanding the ramifications. And he worries about the ease of which people young in their lives might be experiencing some crisis of identity in terms of their gender, but then perhaps seem to move on to something else. You know, find where they are, whether they're gay or heterosexual, whatever it is, but they might often be encouraged to make drastic steps too early. And Murray's suggests that perhaps we should have a bit more of a reasoned argument about this. He suggests that the whole trans thing has become a bit too hysterical, and we've just stopped listening to each other, and everything's kind of a knee-jerk reaction. And then there's the whole issue, of course, of whether trans women are really women at all. Murray would say they're not. You know, and anyone who voices any disagreement over this, which until very recently, just a couple of years ago, was just there was no question over this. If anyone voices anything slightly contrary to this view, and I guess most prominently recently it's been J.K. Rowling, you're publicly pilloried, and there's this whole issue of cancel culture as well. So then in the conclusion, he makes it clear that all of these things are issues with completely legitimate and noble origins. I mean, no one in their right minds would want anybody to be treated unjustly or persecuted because of their sexuality, gender, because of their kind of gender fluidity or their race, of course. No one would want that. And Murray is saying, that many strides have been made over the last century or so to rectify those things. Not always successfully, of course, but the things are going in the right direction by and large. But he uses this analogy of a train, which is coming into a station, but then with all this kind of woke identity politics, the train just rushes straight through the station and off the tracks. He says it's just all too much and too hysterical and ultimately very divisive. These attitudes are not going to make us all get along better. It's just going to further entrench the different camps. And in a rather pessimistic note, right at the end of the book, with these issues exacerbated by COVID and of course the tragic death of George Floyd as well, these issues of public discourse has become even more polarised and views more extreme, and there's very little room for people between those views. See, it just has a very pessimistic view. If this carries on, what's going to happen? It's just going to be a disaster for the West. So that's basically this book in a nutshell. Now, Murray, he writes extremely well and he speaks a lot of sense, really. It's very difficult to argue against a lot of what he says. Perhaps he's a bit too stringent at times, a bit too polarising maybe. But I think what I take away from this book, and I suspect of many other people, is that there's an area in the middle where people do genuinely want the best for other people, are generally concerned for social issues, but not at the exclusion of everybody else outside of those groups. I remember knowing a priest once, and when anything went wrong, he just blamed it on demons, and he was looking for demons all the time. If his car went wrong, it's because of a demon, wasn't it? Or an evil spirit. If, he fell over, it was because of an evil spirit. And sometimes if you just keep looking for things obsessively, you will see what you want to see, even in an exaggerated way, perhaps sometimes even when it isn't there at all. And I think that's the worry for this identity politics, this kind of extreme far left stuff. And I think this book tackles that very well. I think this book provokes some sensible discussion about where we can make the world a better place by healing the divisions and helping people suffering from persecution or racism or sexism or homophobia or whatever it might be, but just not tipping the balance and making things more of a problem than they need to be, and creating an attitude of malice and hysteria, and I guess extremism, which much of intersectionality and identity politics provokes. Thanks for watching, and I've just provided a brief slideshow of some of the themes and what this book is about. Bye.